Budget Finance and Audit Committee. This is our monthly meeting for October 2025, first day of October. I'd like to welcome the members of our committee who are here beside myself, Jeffrey Mekowicz, who's a member. Our other member, Paul Weech, is excused because he is on vacation. And so we'll proceed with the agenda. I want to welcome the public. Mr. President, we apologize for the delay in the start of the meeting. It was due to the fact that we had an earlier committee meeting that preceded this one. It took a little longer than we anticipated. So again, I apologize to you and thank you for your indulgence in continuing to be with us for what appears to be a fairly long agenda for our Budget Finance and Audit Committee. So we will be bringing in cots and food soon. So thank you all very much for being present with us and the staff as well. And so we will then proceed with the agenda. The first item is the approval of the minutes of August the 26th, 2025. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Probably moved in second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. So ordered. Under our discussion and action agenda, we have the first item is our fiscal year 2025 fourth quarter unaudited financial statements. I will turn to our President, Chelsea Andrews.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, the HOC team, and members of the public. Commissioners, this first item is an item that comes to the committee to share insight in regards to our financial position. I will just start by saying, of course, as we wound down FY25 throughout the course of the year, every quarter, we were providing information to the commission as it pertains to our financial position. As we reflect on the year, we still see that we have been working our way through the impact of COVID and ultimately also the impact of delayed receivables from our tenants. But we are beginning to see the light at the end of the tunnel. At the end of the year, we will reflect in the materials that you've seen that our assets increased, our net income increased, our net position increased. We still have healthy ratios, and we are beginning to see finally tenant receivables go down. Our CFO, Tim Getzinger, will provide a high-level overview and walk through this material with us. But just wanted to reiterate that as we continue to level set and as we continue to move forward, we are beginning to see some positive outcomes. But as the year wrapped up for 25, it did result in us having a deficit that we do need to address to balance our books. And with that, I will turn it over to our CFO, Tim Getzinger.
Thank you, President Andrews, commissioners, and the viewing public. For the record, my name is Tim Getzinger, Senior VP of Finance and CFO. Today, the finance team will be presenting on several items, including unaudited financials, budget to actuals, budget amendments, the county CIP budget request, tenant write-offs, the renewal of our banking contract, and an assortment of procurement requests. Before providing an overview of the agency's financials, I wanted to mention two items. First, the Federal Reserve made an additional 25 basis point cut in September and signaled the likelihood of additional reductions by the end of calendar year 2025. This will be favorable for borrowing and to fund development projects, as well as to promote homeownership opportunities. The opposite will be true for investment yield and generating interest income. Secondly, it has been indicated that the federal shutdown will not impact ongoing programs, such as the Housing Choice Voucher Program. It is expected that funding will not be interrupted. Additionally, we hold a modest reserve known as the restricted net position, and HUD holds an additional portion that agencies may draw on by request known as the HUD held reserve. The agency also has a $5 million that it can draw down on with the commission approval from our $60 million line of credit for working capital. These combined resources could provide up to $10 million in contingency funding, or about a month of voucher funding should there be interruptions. Again, we do not expect any for the HCVP program. However, new projects or initiatives will likely be interrupted, such as project underwriting requests, And to be on the safe side, I've reached out to PNC Bank and they're ready and willing to help out as needed. Just for historic context, most of these shutdowns, when they do go ahead, last about 5 to 8 days. There's some rumors of how long this might last. The last one was 35 days. That's just, what has happened before. With that said, before we go into the audited financial, here's a few of the agency's highlights. HOC's financial health remains stable. Total assets increased year over year by 61.4 million to 2.3 billion, which is the highest year-end mark in agency history. And that's primarily driven by development activities. Net position increased by 14.7 million to 310 million from the start of the fiscal year, which is another agency high watermark, mainly driven by non-operating items, primarily unrealized gains on investments, and 3 new properties, which is Battery Park, Forest Oak, and Metro Point, which have joined the OH fund. This was offset by 7.8 million in operating losses due to the timing of commitment and development fees and the aforementioned property performance. Current and quick ratios are slightly down from the beginning of the fiscal year, but remain healthy at 2.9 and 2.48 respectively. HAP utilization declined year over year and has remained at about 94% for the past quarter due to a slight increase in awards, but primarily due to end of participations from failure to recertify, followed by an unfortunate increase in deaths. Staff have increased its leasing plan, increasing its monthly applicant screening by 67% from 300 to 500 applicants per month, and expect these efforts to yield positive results. On the bright side, tenant arrearages are an issue, but have declined yet again this quarter and are down 1.6 million over the last 2 quarters. And just to remind you, arrearages have been increasing about 1.1 million every quarter for the last 1.5 years. A review of our non-revolving funds also demonstrates stability and are projected to improve with upcoming commitment and development fees. Reserves, including the general fund operating and property reserves, are stable. However, end of the year performance will impact reserves. This will be discussed fully in the presentation of the budget to actuals. Regarding the budget to actuals, post-COVID normalization of operations is underway. And as the commission is aware, this is a long process as the core system continues to be a hurdle in repossessing and repositioning our inventory. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions, or we could move on to the first quarter or the fourth quarter unaudited.
You sort of already addressed one of my main concerns, which is the HAP utilization. And, we've been dropping down. I know we added some, but, we're almost 200 units lower in utilization than we were this time last year. So, I think we really do need to focus on that and get that utilization rate back up, given the need that's out there. So
absolutely, there's definitely a concentrated effort. In fact, it's an all hands on deck scenario. One division or one department within the division used to focus on this issue. Now the entire HRD staff is focused on trying to ensure that we're able to move as quickly as we can to get these units, the vouchers on the street and people leased. Yes.
What would you keep going?
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, following on Jeff's question, and what do you think are the major factors that have contributed to the utilization rate going down?
Right. There are a couple of factors. One, there was a true up that happened with HUD in terms of what's called the PIC and our current listing, where we obtained an updated list in regards to deceased tenants and deceased participants. And so that started with the trickle down effect of us realizing that our utilization went down when we learned that there were individuals that were deceased. We also have seen an uptick in terms of individuals not completing or responding to requests to complete their certification materials. And there might be multiple reasons for that, but if you do not recertify, And you are given an opportunity to request a hearing. We're very lenient in that in terms of the due process rights. But if you don't go through the process, we're not able to keep you in the program. As you all know, our resident services team does multiple reach outs, personal reach outs. And then again, there is the opportunity for hearings. And then we had, of course, the additional vouchers that we were awarded. And also some staffing changes that resulted in there being delays in terms of processing. And so we have had to really work hard at addressing multiple challenges at the same time. Our current utilization is at 95%. We expect to be at 96%. We're trending to 96% here in the next few months, and we'll continue to increase our efforts. As you all know, we will be absorbing the emergency housing vouchers. However, despite the fact that it would potentially result in an immediate increase to utilization, we want to utilize the funds as long as we can from the federal government for the emergency housing voucher program. And so we'll hold off on absorbing those until we no longer have those funds available in 26. So we will just continue our efforts as it pertains to getting our utilization up. And we've increased our call outs. In fact, just last month, the call out went up to 1,000 reach outs instead of just 500. But that, of course, results in a much higher number of people responding to see if they're eligible and having to make sure that we have the staff overtime if needed to be able to respond to the high volume response.
I was glad to hear that one of the conditions was not the participation of our landlords, our owners.
Right.
Okay, I mean, as long as people can get a voucher and can find housing, that's really an important factor in terms of the whole process. So
I will just say that there is a challenge in terms of not necessarily source of income discrimination, because we have not had to make a great deal of referrals in that regard. But we do hear from our tenants the challenges that they face as it pertains to credit worthiness with finding housing. And so an area that our resident services team will be focused on is how we can really ramp up our support in that effort to get people credit worthy by the time they get to the top of the list. And it takes time. You can't all of a sudden change your credit score overnight. So we are going to do some analysis to think about almost a year before, 2 years before, those individuals who are on the waiting list. Can we really concentrate efforts for that population to ensure that they are in a position to not only credit worthiness, but also ensuring that they don't have former evictions on their records? Those are the reasons why individuals who are receiving a voucher continue to have challenges with locating housing in the county.
And I've always found it interesting that PIC data picks up information about deceased persons who are recipients faster sometimes than the jurisdiction does. Mm-hmm. Because people don't, the family doesn't think to report that.
Right.
Okay. They've got so many other things to worry about, but I always have found that interesting that PIC sent you a report and said, you know, this person should no longer be on your roll. We should be paying you all because they are gone. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Interesting point.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Okay, moving to the first agenda item, please scroll to page 9, the combined statements of net position. Thank you. As of the quarter ended June 30th, 2025, the commission's total assets, including the deferred outflows, was $2.3 billion, an increase of I'm sorry? Oh, yes. Let me make that bigger. Slightly. Okay. You can hold the control and scroll your mouse. Right, okay. There you go.
Well, I have this little pause I was acknowledge the presence of our commissioners, John from Miller, who is here in the audience.
Thank you. As of the quarter ended June 30th, 2025, the commission's total assets, including the deferred outflows, was $2.3 billion, an increase of $61 million, or about 2.8% from $2.2 billion, which posted in the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2024. Excluding the deferred outflows of resources, the increase of total assets is $83 million. There was a corresponding increase in the total liabilities from $1.83 billion in June 2024 to $1.9 billion in June 2025. The commission's net position also increased by $14.7 million from $295.9 million in FY24 to $30.6 million in FY25 due to the non-operating revenue, partially offset by the non-operating loss during the fiscal year 2025. In addition, the limited partner's interest in Forest Oak Towers and Wheaton Metro was transferred to HOC in FY25. HOC ended FY25 fourth quarter operating with a net income of $7.2 million, as compared with a net loss of $915,000 for the same period in FY24. Backing out the unrealized net gains on investments of $2 million under the single family and multifamily bond funds and $4.8 million in gains of sale of assets from Brookville Road and the 10 scattered site units at McKendree and MPDU 1/64. This results in an adjusted net income of $373,000 in FY25 versus the $215,000 in adjusted net income in FY24. The liquidity ratios as of the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2025 are slightly lower compared with last year's, as the total short-term debts increased more than the increases in current assets, largely driven by current maturing bond principal and interest, as well as accrued vendors payable. The current ratio was 2.9 in June 2025 and 3.46 in June 2024, whereas the quick ratio was 2.48 in 2025 and 2.98 in June 2024. A current ratio of 2.0 and a quick ratio of 1.0 are generally considered healthy. The increase in total assets is mainly due to the following: an increase in net capital assets from the acquisition of Battery Park, the transfer of Forest Oak and Metro Point limited partner equity to HOC, capital improvement at the Metropolitan, construction costs at HOC headquarters, redevelopment expenses at Garnkirk and Emery Grove, demolition costs at Elizabeth House and capital improvement and turnover expenses at several properties, partly reduced by the sale of Brookville Road property, 10 scattered site units, again at McKendree and MPDU 1, with normal depreciation of assets. The increase in bond-related mortgages at Elizabeth House 3 and Hillendale, additional relock draws for Westside Shady Grove Building B and Wheaton Gateway, and advances from the FHA risk-sharing reserve for Elizabeth House 3, also known as the Leggett, offset by the payoff of the Willow Manor relock draw, Shady Grove OHRF loan, and scheduled amortization of federal financing bank loans. There is an increase in accounts receivable consisting mainly of accrued development fees from Willow Manor, rent subsidy receivable at several OH properties, as well as prepaid expenses and insurance claims. There's a decrease in restricted long-term investments due to additional bond draws for HOC headquarters, the Leggett, and Hillendale. Also, the issuance of 2025 Housing Production Fund limited obligation bonds, scheduled bond redemptions, mortgage-backed security purchases, and related investment activities under the single-family and multifamily bond funds. The increase in total liabilities is mainly driven by the issuance of new HPF and MHDB bonds, the Battery Park, Battery Lane, and Bradley Crossing real estate transaction, relocked loan repayments from Willow Manor and Brookville, as well as additional relock draws for several properties under different phases of development. I will pause on the balance sheet items and see if you have any questions.
None from me.
No, I don't have any. Thank you.
Moving to page 10, which is the combined statements of revenue and expenses. Thank you. The commission has a total net income of $7.2 million during the year end June 30th, 25, compared with a net loss of $916,000 for the same period in the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2024. Excluding the unrealized gain on investments and gain on sale of assets, HOC closed FY25 with an adjusted net income of $373,000 as compared with a net income of $215,000 in FY24, mainly due to the following: an increase of HAP revenue, dwelling rental income, federal, state, and county grants, investment income, and interest on mortgage and construction loans receivable, as well as a corresponding increase in HAP expenses, administrative expenses, maintenance, interest expense, and fringe benefits. The total operating revenues increased by $29 million from $316 million in FY24 to $345 million in FY25, largely driven by an increase in HAP revenue, rent revenue, investment and interest income. Backing out the HAP revenue and unrealized gains and losses on investment, the commission ended with an adjusted operating revenue of $118 million in FY25 and $178 million in FY24, for an increase in $11 million. The operating expenses also increased from $326 million in FY24 to $353 million in FY25, up by $27 million, due primarily to an increase in HAP expense, administration, fringe benefits, maintenance, and interest expense. If we exclude the HAP expense, the increase in adjusted operating expenses is $13.6 million, from $182.6 million to $196.2 million. The non-operating net revenues after backing out the gain of sale on the Brookville and scattered site units amount to $10.2 million in FY25, up by $2.4 million from $7.8 million in FY24. An increase in investment income, interest income on mortgage and construction loans receivable, and other grants, partially offset by an increase in the interest expense accounted for non-operating revenue favorable variance. More detailed information is provided in the notes to financial statements on pages 13 to 18. This concludes the financial statements presentation, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
I don't have any questions, but I do want to state that I do appreciate seeing the notes that you provide to us in advance of this presentation, because it helps really flow through, because there's a lot of information that if you don't have some, feel about it through getting an opportunity to read through those notes, it really sometimes can be very difficult to follow it. So I appreciate
Absolutely.
you do that. Makes it easier to understand for me.
No questions.
None. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is a presentation that is made to the Budget, Finance, and Audit Committee, does not require any action on our part related to this report. So with that, I'll proceed to the next item on the agenda, which is the first quarter budget. It's the fourth quarter budgetary actual statement.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Commissioners, this information is in alignment with what we previously heard from the CFO as it pertains to some of the outcomes of ongoing lease enforcement efforts, but also, as I shared earlier, reflecting the fact that as we wound down last year, there was a gap in terms of our expectations and our hopes for tenant receivables and reality. We are still working very hard to get to a point where our properties can begin to produce the income that we anticipate, and we are heavily involved in lease enforcement activities right now, and will be over the next few quarters as we continue to work our way through. But I will just say that in this instance, We have our full property management team. Every position, I believe, maybe even only one is vacant right now. So the department is fully stabilized. The effort is definitely focused, and we're working very closely with the maintenance team so that when we do have the opportunity to recapture our units, we're able to quickly get them back on the streets so that we can begin to generate a profit. And so I will turn it over to our budget officer, Terry Fowler, to provide you with more details as it pertains to our end of year. And I will just also indicate that there has been some good work done in terms of thinking creatively on how we can balance the budget. And we believe that the recommendations we're advancing here reflect our best effort to be reasonable, but also to avoid a scenario in which our entire reserves are put towards balancing the budget. So trying to juggle all of the various components. And with that, I'll turn it over to Terry Fowler.
Thank you. Good morning, Commissioners, President Andrews, staff, and the viewing public. For the record, I'm Terry Fowler, the Budget Officer. And as President Andrews mentioned, I will be discussing the year-end budget to actual statements for fiscal 25. If we can turn to page 16 of the packet. Thank you. The agency ended the year with a net cash flow shortfall of approximately $11.2 million, which equates to 3.15% of the total operating budget of approximately $355.4 million, or 6.2% of the total adjusted operating budget of approximately $178.8 million. The adjusted operating budget excludes housing assistance payments and other federal and county grants, as well as the single and multifamily bond funds. The primary causes were the lower unrestricted cash flow in some of the properties as a result of the property performance, coupled with lower fee income in the general fund, partially offset by savings in various expense categories in that fund. Staying on page 16, the general fund consists of the basic overhead costs for the agency, and it is expected that the fund would operate in a deficit. The funds are primarily funded by a cost allocation model, but rely heavily on fees, which include loan management fees, which are a stable source of income, commitment and development fees, which are estimates based on the current plans at the time the budget was approved, and our unrestricted cash flow from our properties. The fund ended the year with a deficit of approximately $4.2 million, which resulted in a negative variance of $2.4 million when compared to the budgeted projection. At June 30, income in the general fund was approximately $5.9 million lower than budget, and expenses were $3.7 million lower in budget. The negative income variance was primarily the result of delays in the receipt of our planned commitment and development fees. Approximately $4.68 million of the $5.88 million variance in income was due to the delay in these fees. A portion of the fees were already incorporated into the FY26 budget that was adopted in June. There are additional fees that we anticipated at year end that we did not receive that will result in a positive variance in the FY26 upcoming budget due to the delay in those fees. In addition to the fees, the Development Corporation fees, which is simply the mechanism by which we take unrestricted cash flow from those properties, was also lower in the general fund due to property performance. And we had lower draws from the Opportunity Housing Reserve Fund, or OHRF, for real estate personnel and pre-development costs. The impact of the lower fees was partially offset by higher interest income earned on our unrestricted cash in the general fund. The positive expense variance in the general fund was primarily the result of lapse in salary and benefits, coupled with savings and miscellaneous contracts and capital projects, which resulted in lower transfers from the operating budget to cover the cost of the projects. Moving on to the bond funds, both the single and multifamily bond fund income was consistent with budget as it reflects the draws to support the administrative cost of the program. The multifamily and single family bond funds experienced positive expense variances of approximately $435,000 and $372,000 respectively as a result of salary and benefit lapse coupled with savings in publications, registration fees, and professional services. President Andrews mentioned that we will later in this presentation be making a recommendation of how to cover the shortfall for fiscal 25. Part of that recommendation will include using the unspent bond funds to reduce the agency shortfall at year end. There is precedent for using bond draws for agency operations, and both the bond draws for 25 and 26 were approved for the indentures, and this will not result in a negative impact to the programs. If we can move to page 17 of the packet and the top part of the chart, please. We'll begin our discussion for the properties. As was mentioned previously, we are working through the impacts of COVID, and that has further been complicated by the impacts of rising costs and potential tariffs on our property costs for maintenance. The first chart here, it's broken into two pieces. The top portion is our unrestricted properties, and this group ended the year with a cash flow deficit of $288,000 or $4.9 million less than projected. Some of the key contributors to our property performance, as has been mentioned, were our higher vacancy loss, which has been exacerbated by the lease enforcement efforts that result in additional vacancy. Vacancy loss is up 22% over fiscal 24. Our bad debt, which also was impacted by the true-up that was occurring at year end for the allowances, is up 30% from 24, and maintenance was up 8% from 24. However, the variance to budget for maintenance was lower than it was in fiscal 24. We had an increase of approximately 6% in utility costs, but again, a smaller variance to budget. It's important to note that we're going to continue to see some of these impacts as we work through the court systems and as we work through making ready the vacated units that result from lease enforcement. But on a positive side, our gross rents, which equate to the rent potential for our units if they were fully occupied, including both the tenant and subsidy payments, were up 10% or $10.8 million from fiscal 24 and experienced a positive variance to budget of just over $1 million. So as we work through these efforts and reoccupy our units with paying tenants, we will start to see a shift from what we've been experiencing in the past couple years.
Can I pause there for a moment?
Absolutely.
And I guess I'm curious, it's not surprising that we're still operating at some deficit, but I guess part of my concern is also just about our ability to make proper projections. And, I think, I don't know, it sounds like a lot of our negative variance, and, correct me if I'm wrong, was mainly driven by, the vacancies and the bad debt. And I wonder, for this is last fiscal year, I'm just wondering where we need to do a better job with our projections so that, we have a better idea at the beginning of the year. Do we think that we have been conservative enough. I know we've been through the budgeting process and I asked these questions, I think, at that time too, but, you know,
Sure.
do we expect to continue seeing, like, regardless of whether we're operating at a deficit, are we going to continue seeing like such negative variances?
So I will say that when we developed the FY26 budget, we did take a conservative look at bad debt to ensure that we were being realistic with what we were finding in the receivables. There has been great efforts in the last 6 months to true up our allowances to what is owed by the tenants over 90 days. That did result in an increase in the bad debt. As we work through the court systems, the allowance, when that gets reduced, will not impact our income statement because we've already taken the hit stating that it was doubtful we would receive the funds. So we have been conservative in that. I will say that these efforts are continuing, and I do anticipate we'll see fluctuation as those reconciliations occur that can result in increases or decreases over the next few months. But the trajectory is positive in that the lease efforts are resulting in retaining and getting back these units, and the maintenance efforts have been exponential over the past year to deal with any backlog that existed in work orders already, and they're primed and ready to handle the units that are coming back to the agency through the eviction process. We're monitoring it closely, but we did take a more conservative approach when we developed the 26 budget as we were learning more about the receivable balances in our properties.
And on the maintenance side, it sounds like, you know, in some ways it was better than could have been this past year, but like now, and I think Tim mentioned the tariffs earlier, are we expecting that to, you know, affect our variances there?
As it stands, we have not seen a significant shift, but we are definitely watching closely, and an effort is underway with our facilities, maintenance, and property management leadership, looking at how we can leverage our purchases across the portfolio as well as for our facilities. And so thinking about how we can potentially go out and do bulk procurements that would ultimately impact all the properties instead of allowing each to go out to get the different supplies and goods that they need. And so we are exploring that. I've also had an opportunity just even recently at NARO to do some comparative between who we use, which is HD Supply and Lowe's. So looking forward to talking to the leadership here about other ways we might be able to renegotiate. But as it stands, we have not seen the uptick. And as you all may know, we follow a just-in-time strategy in terms of our supply management. If we need to make a shift, we do have space and the ability to store certain goods in our own warehouse facility. And if we need to do that for certain goods, we may have to take that step. But it is also evolution. I just saw yesterday, there's a new tariff on kitchen cabinets. So, you know,
Kitchen cabinets, bathroom.
Correct. Very specific goods. And so we will have to explore how we can definitely ensure that we're able to get the best prices possible. I do want to just also indicate our Vice President of Maintenance is in the room here. He has done a great job, Sean Asbury, of not just looking at how we can leverage and try to reduce the costs in terms of the goods and services, but also a full assessment in terms of our utilities and water utilization and making modifications that has resulted in positive outcomes for our properties. And that full assessment is underway. In some instances, it's revealing, and you'll hear more about that as well. But we're definitely taking every step that we can to try to stabilize the properties.
You know, I have years past, I have often hypothesized that you look at the fact that we've got 3,000 public housing agencies across the country, and cumulatively probably purchase a lot of goods, materials. And I said, why is it 3,000 are literally buying their level of goods and supplies that they need? Well, what if we had one aggregate buyer who bought for every authority, and you get the benefit of it, of bulk buying? It would seem to me, even if it started with just those agencies in the region, combined, looking at our procurement and how we could would there be any cost savings generated by doing that? I often wondered about that, but I'm not advocating you do it, but I'm just saying something that I've thought about, because it is about buying more gross, get you a better unit price.
There are actually contracts that are, they're called Omnia contracts, that allow for all of the housing authorities, they've pre-negotiated along with federal government to leverage certain price points and rebates. And so our supplier, HD Supply, is under the Omnia contract, so is Lowe's. And so that's a part of that larger scale negotiation that is underway, and we have taken advantage of those contract rates. Yes.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you. If we move to the bottom section of the same slide, these are the unrestricted development corporations. However, if they do experience a deficit and do not have the existing cash, the agency will cover the shortfall, and that is what we are experiencing with the RAD 6. I will say that they are experiencing the increase in bad debt and maintenance costs. However, as President Andrews just mentioned, we have seen a significant reduction in water usage within this portfolio as a result of the study that was done. In addition, although we did have a slight negative variance in vacancy loss, the properties collectively did achieve 95% occupancy. There was a very small dip in June. However, they have made great strides in maintaining occupancy at that portfolio. If we move to page 18 of our packet, the top section is rather large, but that is where I will be focusing for a moment. This group ended the year with cash flow of approximately 1.49 million, which was about 2.1 million lower than projected. In the bottom section of the graph, this is the restricted portfolio. And again, as mentioned before, there are two properties, Cider Mill and our state rental combined, which is 196 scattered sites in the county. Both experience deficits that they do not have enough funds to cover. I will, however, note that for Cider Mill, although they had a cash flow variance of $645,000, the overall deficit was approximately half of what the deficit was in fiscal 24. And the same is true of the additional variance. So there have been great strides there in occupying and working through lease enforcement. Occupancy is up. It just did not get to where we had anticipated. And a lot of that is due to the court system, but we are seeing improvements year over year and anticipate that that will continue. That is the portion related to our Opportunity Housing Fund, and I'd be happy to address any further questions you may have before we move to the public fund on page 19 of the packet. Can we move to page 19 of the packet, please? Thank you. The Housing Choice Voucher Program ended the year with a surplus of approximately $327,000. This was comprised of housing assistance payment revenue that exceeded the actual expenditures for the year of approximately $108,000 and an administrative surplus of $219,000. Tim mentioned earlier that we have a reserve for our housing assistance payments, so that surplus will go into the net restricted position for future HAP use. The administrative surplus was the result of higher fee income coupled with lower administration expenses due to staff turnover and lower contract costs. For the first half of fiscal 25, the proration rate for administrative expenses was over 97%, which was greater than the 91% we budgeted. In the second half of the year, beginning in January, the proration factor was the same as was budgeted. In addition, when the budget was adopted, we had projected that we would have a shortfall, meaning that the administrative fees we received would not be sufficient to cover the cost and that we would have to draw on reserves from prior savings. As a result of the performance, we did not need to draw those funds and instead will be contributing the surplus of $219,000 to the administrative reserve for future administrative costs of the program that will help us facilitate the needs in increasing the utilization. If we can turn to page 20 of the packet, this chart shows the performance as it relates to capital budgets versus actual capital expenditures. We do have a few properties with smaller shortfalls that they exceeded their capital budget, and there are sufficient reserves to cover that. The total expenditures for the portfolio that was depending on our opportunity housing property reserve did not exceed the amount budgeted there. So that savings, coupled with prior year obligations from the reserve that have not been fully depleted, will be used to cover the overages in properties that do not have sufficient reserves to address their experience at year end. That concludes the presentations of the performance. I'd be happy to answer any questions before I turn it back over to Tim to discuss the staff recommendation for covering the shortfall for fiscal 25.
And again, this may be a detail that you can't provide response to, but when I look at the variances on the capital improvement for some of these properties, some of them are fairly significant difference between the budget and the actual. And I mean, what is the major driver that's causing that distortion between what's projected and what's actually spent?
Right. And it depends on the particular property. But for example, if there was a unique circumstance like an elevator out or boiler, each property has different capital needs that were budgeted, and some of which, if it wasn't budgeted, is a result of an emergency circumstance typically. And so I'm not certain if there is.
Yeah.
And I will say the other indicator here, for example, if you look at our Glenmont properties, there were a lot of inspections that took place, Inspire and county inspections, that weren't expected to result in the amount of violations that we obtained in those properties. You may recall that we changed property management companies for these properties, and it resulted in us having to do a great deal of work to get them ready for the Inspire inspections. I'm just using that as an example. There was some HVAC unit replacements that had to take place. There was a tree removal. So there's always explanations for the variances, but definitely our instruction to both property management, internal, external, and our asset management team is to really project out as best as possible all of the potential major capital repairs that will be needed. So these variances, when they are significant, are reflecting unexpected expenses.
Yeah, I mean, you picked out Glenmont, which is in fact has the biggest variance of any of the properties there. I would expect that next year we wouldn't see that same percentage of increased cost between budget and actual. Because
that is true. And I will say that as we now, because in certain instances, if you receive certain ratings, you know that you're going to get an inspection again the next year. So now our budgets also anticipate which properties will be having follow-up county inspections, what's on the calendar for Inspire inspections. We're also really emphasizing to our third-party property managers that preventive maintenance is required throughout the year and not in response to an upcoming inspection.
Yeah.
And as a result, we do not anticipate large-scale efforts needing to occur to get in compliance. And so we're also strengthening our contracts with our third-party property managers to ensure that any costs that we do not approve would not be covered by HOC, but would be covered by that third-party property manager.
Yeah, I think it's a great practice for the staff to be on top of knowing what's going on in terms of capital requirements. They're driven by our work as opposed to through inspections.
Yes.
You know what I mean? We should be proactive in what we're doing in terms of being aware of our capital requirement needs, because that does reflect on our budget and what we put as our projections. So, okay, that's good practice. Okay.
Okay, so this
We need a
last
motion.
part,
Yeah, I don't think we threw it. We haven't finished the presentation on the budget. Actually,
let's move to page 13 of the packet. Tried to provide you with enough information to provide you with a recommendation on how to fill this budget deficit. There are 4 actions that I am recommending. Recommending this to provide liquidity, sufficient reserves, and then also make sure that we have the ability for future developments. One of these items Terry already spoke about. It would be to utilize the $807,000 in unspent bond rolls. This would have no fiscal impact. We would basically just be shifting those unspent bond funds to be able to cover it.
So are those aren't restricted, or what, are we allowed to?
We do have precedent of doing draws from the bonds for support of agency costs. We have not done it in several years, but early on in my tenure, 20 some years, that was a standard practice that when we budgeted for the draws from the bonds, it included a draw to support agency operations. And so the funds have already been drawn. We already have approval to draw sufficient funds for the upcoming, well, not upcoming, we're in it, fiscal 26.
And in this case, the funds we've already
drawn. They are at
what
the
would happen to those funds?
we would roll them forward if we didn't use them, and we would reduce the draws in the upcoming year. So this will just change that we won't reduce the already approved draws.
Okay.
So there's no fiscal impact with that particular recommendation. The next would be to utilize 1.23 million in accumulated balances from swap terminations. We proceeded with this action last year. There were 2 swap terminations, one for the Lindley, the other for Alexander House. Due to differences in certain interest rates, it provided us with certain money that was available. Ordinarily, we would use that to pay off existing line of credit advances that we made because we capitalized certain items for it. By not paying them down, what we do is we stretch out when we make those repayments into the mid part of fiscal 35 to 37, essentially 1 year later. But by freeing up those funds and utilizing it for the budget deficit, we don't have to draw as much on the general fund operating reserve. And again, we did this last year, and that is for your consideration. The next has to do with potential transfers from the general fund to the OHRF. As you're aware, the agency does several different development activities. These activities provide with commitment and development fees. Ordinarily, these fees are split 60% to the OHRF, 40% to the general fund. In this case, after reconciliation, we have determined that there is a $4.7 million due from the general fund to the OHRF. We have not recognized this revenue into the OHRF in any report. So the balance in the OHRF, as we have reflected and reported on it, would remain the same. We're also anticipating about $9 million being repaid this year into the OHRF. But what this would do is we would not transfer it from the general fund to the OHRF. It would not provide the general fund with any additional cash or liquidity, but it would simply be a paper transaction in which we cancel that transfer. By doing that, we would not need to utilize general fund operating reserve, which would be needed for $4.7 million. The fourth and final would be to utilize the general fund operating reserve. What should be mentioned is that in years prior, the agency has maintained and increased its general fund operating reserve, and it's at its highest level in the agency history currently. And aside from the unobligated balance, we also have about a $4.655 million reserve for debt service for the headquarters. Should we ever need to draw on that. By utilizing $4.4 million, we would still have $7.0 million left in the general fund operating reserve should we need to use it in future fiscal years. And so essentially what I'm trying to do in these four options is to combine them all. And again, provide us with enough liquidity, provide us with future reserves, and to be able to provide us with the opportunity for future developments. Otherwise, it would be a significant draw on the general fund operating reserve. In fact, it would be nearly all of it, which clearly I would not recommend it under any circumstance.
And what's the total amount you're recommending?
11.2 million is the operating deficit. And what we would be drawing from it under the scenarios that I just provided, 4.4, and again, we would have 7 million available.
I would make a motion to, accept the fourth quarter statements and forward those to the commission, and also to support the staff's recommendations on covering the operating deficit.
I'll second that. Properly moved and second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. So ordered. One
Thank
thing
you.
I would, in the recommendations you've made for these four different ways to approach covering the deficit, looking at how that's going to compromise our going forward if we confront the same thing in 26.
So what I can say is that the agency has put together a multi-year operating budget to take a look at different scenarios and to take a look at different revenues and expenses that we would see to determine whatever kind of gaps or things that we would potentially see in FY 26, 27, 28. So we are actively, monitoring that, and we do want to make sure that we have significant resources available, but we are actively monitoring that.
Okay. All right. Thank you. We'll go to the next item on the agenda, which in this case is the first quarter budget amendment.
Thank you. Commissioners, this is an item that will be presented by our budget officer, Terry Fowler. It's pretty straightforward in regards to amending our budget to reflect new programs that we have stood up with the board's support and approval, as well as rolling over some capital funds. And with that, I will turn it over to Terry Fowler.
Thank you, President Andrews. If we could go slightly lower in the first page of the packet. As mentioned, this budget amendment includes 2 additional subsidy programs for our customers. They affect both the general fund and the public fund of our budget. The first is the statewide rental assistance voucher program. And within this program, it is a 5-year program. And based on the funding received, we will be able to support approximately 95 families. And staff has begun working on utilizing those funds. We received approximately $1.2 million in May, and additional annual allotment will come this month of approximately $1.6 million. So the total budget is slated to increase based on the funds that we are going to utilize. Similar with the HAP and Housing Assistance Program, when we do the budget, we will budget those funds that are going to be utilized and received that year and the anticipated expenditures for the year. In addition, there will be a small management fee paid to the agency of approximately $13,000, which will result in income into the general fund for that program. The second program is the HOC Bridge Program, and that is an HOC initiative where we will be using interest earned on funds that we have received for future MPDUs. The interest earned is in the account. We've received approval from the county to utilize those funds to have a pilot program that will provide subsidies to additional participants. This program has different restrictions as far as certifications and income levels. So there will be a less administrative burden, both on the agency and on the customer. The initial cohort for this program will be approximately 10 individual families, and we have sufficient interest and anticipate that the interest earned in the remainder of fiscal 26 will fully support the 10 units, and that will enable us to see how the program works and have potential for increasing that utilization in future years. We are also working closely with our real estate development team to ensure that if there are any development plans for the use of those funds, that's taken into consideration in the projections for interest available for the programs. And the final portion of the packet is a pro forma item that happens each year. If there are capital projects planned during a given year that were not able to be completed and the funds were not spent, the properties and or the agency can request to roll forward those projects. And we have 4 properties that have requested roll forwards on that. If we turn to page 5 of the packet, this will show you the change in the budget. I will mention that the chart here still includes the bond draws rolling forward. And since we now have the agreement with our recommendation, that piece will be taken out. It has no impact in the bottom line of the budget. So as I mentioned, due to the fee we receive from the statewide voucher program, the first quarter budget amendment results in a surplus of approximately $13,000, which will reduce the anticipated draw from the general fund operating reserve. The total operating budget for the agency increases from $376.88 million to $378.57 million, an increase of just under $1.7 million, primarily due to the 2 new subsidy programs. And in addition, on the next slide, on page 6, you see the impact to the capital budget of the request for capital project roll forwards. Our capital budget would increase from approximately $464.1 million to $465.2 million, an increase of approximately $1.1 million. And approval by the commission of these amendments will revise the FY26 budget to reflect an accurate plan for the use of agency resources. I'd be happy to address any questions you may have.
Questions?
I don't have any questions. I was just glad to see we were increasing our request on the for the money for the improvements, so that we can do more renovations. Yeah, it's got such a huge backlog. But otherwise, I would make a motion to support the staff's recommendation.
I second it. Probably moved and seconded to approve the recommendation to advance this forward to the full commission. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. So ordered. Thank you. Next item on the agenda has to do with the um, the county's fiscal year 27 to 32 capital improvement program budget.
Yes. Commissioners, this comes before you on an annual basis as it pertains to our request to the county for support. I will, yes, you were a little ahead of us.
Right.
That's fine. You were speed reading. So in any event, we are going to the county with a request. They have been a wonderful partner for us, and even just last year increased funding for resident services and for cider mill, as you might recall. We're now in the cycle in terms of new funding for capital improvements, and you will see that we are requesting additional funding. We're able to demonstrate that we can put the money to good use as it pertains to our scattered sites, as well as requesting support for the ongoing demolition work that's taking place at Elizabeth House. And so I will turn it over to Terry Fowler, our budget officer, to provide more details.
Thank you, President Andrews. As was mentioned, the County Capital Improvements Program is a biennial program. And this is a full cycle year. And then in the next year will be the amendment where you can request amendments. In this year, I will mention that the submissions were due by September 5th, but as been done in the past, we did request and receive an extension to October 8th to allow for commission approval. We do need to request again continued funding for our bond-related programs, and we have the MPDU Property Acquisition Fund, the Opportunity Housing Development Fund, and our county guaranteed bond funds. The first two are revolving funds that are to be paid back, and then the funds can be reused. And the county bond is our obligation of up to $50 million. And the same thing is that those funds are repaid and then available for use. As was mentioned, we are requesting an increase in our annual support level for our affordable units to do improvements. Great strides were made this year. We had a change in the way we run the program, and we're administering it internally through our maintenance team in conjunction with our real estate development division. And so we were able to obligate all but $800,000 of the carryover and fully spend in excess of $2.6 million this year, which assisted us getting units back online. So we are requesting that that fund be doubled from the 1.25 to the 2.5 million. It is funded by current revenue, so it does compete with not only the capital improvements program, but the operating budget as well that we'll be bringing you in October. However, we have demonstrated not just the need, which has always been there, but the ability to utilize the funds in the year obligated. So we are asking for your support to request that increase. In addition, if we turn to page 3 of the packet, at the bottom of that page, please. Thank you. The Elizabeth House demolition is ongoing as a result of items that were discovered during the demolition. You may remember that originally the demolition was estimated to be approximately $3 million, of which the capital improvements program funded $1.5 million. In March of 2024, we were notified that we had materials in the building that needed remediation. We did not request those in our capital improvements program, but it was discussed during the operating budget, but was not able to be funded in the county's fiscal year 26 operating budget. But we are asking again to make that request officially through this CIP program. The estimated cost is approximately $1.8 million for the remediation and replacement of materials in that location. So we are requesting that we not close out the program, but continue with the project for the demolition of Elizabeth House and ask the county to increase the funding by $1.8 million. The final project is cider mill improvements for health and safety. We did request funding in last year's CIP for work on our balconies, as well as increased security cameras and lighting at the project. We did receive the $250,000 for the security measures, but we did not receive funding for the balconies. In further review of the property, the continued problems with the roofs have been elevated above the need for the balconies. However, we're going to request funding for both, with the prioritization of the roofs because they create health issues and for the property. So we are requesting an increase of $2.1 million for those two projects. We're asking the BF&A to join our recommendation to recommend to the commission this submission. It will include a total of $102.5 million, 88.6 million of that is for our existing budgets carrying forward. And then we have the increase for the improvements for our affordable units, the expansion of the Elizabeth House demolition fund by 1.8 million, and the expansion of the cider mill capital improvements for health and safety of 2.1 million. And I'd be happy to address any questions you may have.
I'll reiterate my support in the proper place this time, but also just note that the briefing materials noted that like at the 1.25 million, it would take us 50 years to get through our current portfolio, our backlog. And I imagine we're at 2.5 million, maybe that takes us down to 25 years, which still, the cycle, it just means that we're never ending. And so I think, I know we've got a disposition strategy as well, and we've had some successful partnership with Habitat for Humanity on that. But I think it just illustrates that there's, and I know there's a bigger plan, but it just illustrates just how much work there is to be done here.
I have no questions.
I will make a motion to support the staff's recommendation.
I second your motion. Probably moved and seconded to approve the staff recommendation relative to our capital budget amendment. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. So ordered.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda has to do with our favorite subject, tenant accounts receivable. And I will turn to you, President Andrews, about this.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Again, we come before the committee and the board on a quarterly basis as it pertains to tenant accounts receivables that we need to write off. As you can see, we're still having to pursue write-offs for tenants who aren't paying their rent. And at this stage and for this particular quarter, the request is for $759,553. We do pursue collection activity for those accounts. I'd like to turn it over to our finance team. I believe Sewa Abajan, our accounting manager, is going to provide this update.
Thank you, President Andrews. Good morning, commissioners, staff, and member of the public. For the record, my name is Sewa V. Prince Abujan, accounting manager with HOC Finance Division. We are seeking your support for the write-off of uncollectible tenant account receivable for the fourth quarter of fiscal year 2025. HOC's current policy is to provide for an allowance for any tenant account receivable balance in excess of 90 days. Additionally, HOC periodically proposes the write-off of uncollected former resident balances. The proposed write-off of former tenant account receivable balances for the fourth quarter of fiscal year 2025 is $759,553. As with the last few quarters, lease enforcement was by far the largest driver in write-off, accounting for 77%. Here is our comparative analysis. Overall, fiscal year 2025 write-off has increased 59% when compared to fiscal year 2024. This represents $1.4 million in fiscal year 2024 compared to $2.2 million in fiscal year 2025. When we take the same comparison to the property level, RAD properties have experienced the highest increase in bad debt write-off with a 417% increase when compared to fiscal year 2024. This represents $66,000 in fiscal year 2024 as opposed to $344,000 in fiscal year 2025. The opportunity housing properties have experienced an increase of 43% in bad debt, resulting in $1.8 million write-off in fiscal year 2025 compared to $1.2 million in fiscal year 2024. The supporting housing, however, has experienced a decrease of 21% in bad debt, resulting in a $28,000 write-off in fiscal year 2025 compared to $35,000 in fiscal year 2024. Lastly, there was no reported bad debt for the 236 property in fiscal year 2025. We have continued our lease enforcement effort with a continued focus on large delinquent accounts. This effort has impacted 10 delinquent accounts in VPC2, totaling to $346,956 in bad debt. The lease enforcement has also impacted one delinquent account with a large balance of $115,176 in MHLP8. So the next anticipated write-off of former tenant uncollectible account receivable balances will be for the first quarter of fiscal year 2026, which will cover the period going from July 1st through September 30th of 2025. Today, we are seeking your support to recommend to the Commission the write-off of uncollectible tenant account receivable for the fourth quarter of fiscal year 2025. With this, I'll be happy to address any questions you may have.
This is always a tough subject here because on one hand, we've increased our write-off from last year almost by $900,000. Yet we're doing more actions to recover payments and get people current. And maybe that contributes to why there's a higher amount of receivables having to be written off. But it seems like we're going in the wrong direction in total amount. I would love to get to a point where we don't have a write-off in any quarter. I mean, we are billing and receiving all of our money. That probably would not happen in my lifetime, but
You said you'd throw us a party.
no,
You said you'd throw a party.
I would. Yeah, I'm off the hook.
I will note at the top of this, an hour and a half ago, I think I noted that the overall tenant receivable actually has dropped quarter over quarter for the first time in about a year and a half. It's actually reduced overall by 1.6 million over the last 6 months, and it was about, I think, 790,000 this past quarter. So hopefully that does indicate that these actions will start slowing down, but they have, from the overall portfolio perspective, are starting to decrease. Yes.
Well, maybe that's a point you should include in the narrative which is presented to the full commission. So it gives us some perspective about what we're talking about here, because this is an increase from the third quarter.
Let's hope it's a case of being darkest before the dawn. So I'll make a motion to support the staff's recommendation to authorize the write-off.
I'll second the motion.
Thank you.
All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries.
Thank you.
The next item has to do with a procurement item. Is dealing with the selection of a vendor for pipelining at Battery Lane. Is that correct?
Skipped,
That's good one?
Yeah, PNC.
skipped.
Oh,
IT team, can we move the presentation to the next item?
okay. It's not on my
Thank
run
you.
or show.
Yes, it's showing now. Oh, apologize for that.
Okay, the actually going back to the agenda, request to extend the banking services with PNC Bank. President Jeff Andrews.
Yes, thank you. Commissioners, this is a request to extend our contract, our banking services contract with PNC. As you will note in the memo that was provided, our procurement policy has multiple steps that are required for extensions. And in this particular instance, we are at the last extension that must come to the full board for this particular contract with the expectation that we would go out and pursue a full RFP. I will turn it over to our CFO, Tim Getzinger, to provide more detail.
Thank you, President Andrews, Commission. Again, Tim Getzinger, Senior VP of Finance and CFO. The purpose of this item is to extend the banking services contract with PNC Bank for an additional year through September 30th, 2026. President Andrews has already spoken regarding the procurement policy and where we are in terms of this. This contract has been in place since 2008. PNC Bank has met or exceeded all HOC expectations during this 17-year period. PNC has invested significant time and effort into learning about HOC, its businesses, our clients, and has dedicated services throughout its treasury management, capital markets, real estate, and other services and disciplines. A few noteworthy items. In December 2023, HOC transitioned nearly 200 checking accounts into interest-bearing accounts, which generate around 4.5 million. Again, I mentioned that the Fed cut the rate, which has a 1-for-1 impact on the amount that we receive in terms of interest. But to date, we've received about $13 million because of this. Also, HOC has 2 lines of credit with PNC Bank, which help to provide liquidity, transparency, and efficiency. The rates on these lines are more competitive than its market counterparts. Finally, PNC has graciously agreed to waive its treasury management fees through the duration of this contract. And the question here is, will the Budget, Finance, and Audit Committee join staff's recommendation to the Commission to extend the banking services contract with PNC Bank for an additional year through September 30th, 2026? And I would be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? I mean, I think that we certainly have had a very positive relationship with PNC Bank in a number of ways. And so I certainly would wholeheartedly support this recommendation to advance this extension for another year. That means you've got some work to do putting out another registration document for looking at this kind of service again, but I would imagine that PNC will continue to be very competitive. So
I will make a motion to support the recommendation.
second it. Been probably moved in second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next item coming before us has to do with the approval of procurement procedures for the selecting a vendor for pipelining at Battery Lane.
Yes.
President.
Thank you. Commissioners, as we continue, as you all know, within the last year plus, we acquired multiple properties, Battery Lane being one of them, in the Bethesda area in an effort to preserve affordable housing. A part of our acquisition included assessing the property, determining what type of capital needs the property had, exploring and trying to hone in on and address backlogs as it pertains to lease enforcement, but also the overall condition of the property. A part of our due diligence efforts these last few months has revealed an issue at Battery Lane that was not apparent at the at the point where we acquired this asset. It appears as though the property has what's called pinhole leaks. And as a result, our team has worked through some potential resolutions to address these issues. It's not an urgent or emergency issue, so I want to just say that, but it is something that if it goes unaddressed, will continue to create extenuating expense on the property and on HOC as it pertains to water and repairs. And so with that overview, I'd like to turn it over to our Vice President of Asset Management, Kelly Dickerson, to provide more details.
Thank you, President Andrews and Commissioners. With me also, I'm Kelly Dickerson, Vice President of Asset Management for the record. And with me also is Aaron Smith, our Asset Manager. Indeed, HOC at Battery Lane is a 202-unit property consisting of 3 buildings. And with its recent acquisition and long-term goal of being redeveloped, we are still operating the property as best we can for our residents at low and moderate income levels. These pinhole-sized leaks in the copper pipes are throughout all 3 of the buildings on the property. And the plumbing is, of course, original to the building, dated in circa 1965. And these recurring leaks are disruptive to tenants as well as drive increased operating expenses, which we all know can be something that we're trying to avoid, obviously. After realizing the systemic nature of this problem, we brought in Sean Asbury, our VP of maintenance, as well as the team on site, the management team, and determined that it would be best to address these leaks holistically at one time to prevent the ongoing issues. Of course, the challenges, go to the next slide, thank you. The challenge is, of course, how do you do so without disrupting the tenants? And that is where coming up with this solution around epoxy, the epoxy lining of the plumbing became so crucial, because in order to avoid the ongoing destructive investigation behind walls or in cabinets, talking to tenants, determine where the leaks are, you essentially go in and you push epoxy through the plumbing, and you can do that relatively quickly and without disturbing the tenants, so that you can seal all of these leaks, preventing the ongoing water. Indeed, we found someone who would do this work and warranty it for 10 years, although the work would last, or the quality of the lining should last longer than 10 years. Next slide, please. So here, because this is something that's not done as widely as you might think, we found a vendor among very few that could do this work. And they were provided with the scope of service as well as came to the property and did a tour, and they came up with a price of $1.4 million. We were able to determine that that was reasonable in the market, and we also found that it was important to get that done over a short period of time, as I may have alluded to, and that they could do that over 7 months staggered along the timeline that you see in the presentation. So with that recommendation came, how do we pay for it? As this was unexpected, after the acquisition of the property, we determined that we can utilize the OHRF funding as a source to pay for that for prior resolution 2492. And we would add to that $1.4 million estimate a HOC held contingency of 20%, or $283,979. By doing that, we're able to pay for it without immediately impacting the operating budget of the property. And in fact, over time, should see lower costs as a result of addressing this. The capital repair is in the budget, as I mentioned. So we're here today asking for Commissioner support to advance this to the full commission on October 8th. 1, to approve, enact the procedures of the procurement policy to authorize the president and executive director to negotiate and execute a contract with ePipe to do the work for $1.4 million plus our contingency, and approve a draw of up to $1.7 million from the Opportunity Housing Reserve Fund, or OHRF. I'll stop there and pause for questions.
The one question that I have really goes to, um, we haven't been that long since we acquired these properties. I'm kind of wondering what kind of initial review do we do on the capital needs of a property before we acquire it? I mean, the fact that we are now incurring a $1.7 million additional expense related to these properties after we just finished the acquisition of them. You know, it's just a factor that if we had known it, maybe we would or would not have acquired the property. But what transpired between our acquisition and the identification of this property or this problem?
I can answer that question. And as you may recall, Mr. Chair, when we acquired the property prior to making that purchase, our team presented a full overview of all of the information that was provided to us by the seller. We had our team walk out and do a full evaluation of the property, look at all of the capital needs, a look at the books and the information that we received. Because these are pinhole leaks, it's not as apparent as you would notice in other circumstances where there's major evidence of a leak at the property. The reason why we have gotten this granular to determine that there must be another issue is because when we started to evaluate and looking at all of the utilities at this particular site, after acquiring it and breaking down utilities per water versus electric, etc., we noticed that this particular site had higher water utilization than the other properties that we acquired and appeared to be out of line. We also began to look at the number of work orders, and even though they were small, to address a little small leak in a bathroom here or there, that those work orders revealed that there was a higher number of water-related work orders at this site, which resulted in the team going deeper to determine what could be the issue. And that is when we learned that there's pinhole issues at this site. It is not something that I believe we would have learned in any other manner. It's just the nature of acquiring an older asset. There was not a report that, for example, the owner provided to us that would have led us to understand that there's a pinhole leak issue. And quite frankly, we could continue to move forward. Again, it's not an emergency situation, but we want to be proactive now and address the pinhole leak issues throughout this property to avoid this being an ongoing expense and to stabilize. But the type of due diligence that we do whenever there's, and especially in circumstances where there's a ROFR, you don't really have a whole lot of time, but you're doing your best to obtain all of the details that you can on current expenditures, current expenses, work orders, etc. But oftentimes, some of the information you receive, including utilities, if you don't break it down and try to get deeper to understand, well, how much is water and how much was it at this other site versus this site, it can elude you. And in this particular instance, we had no idea at the moment that we purchased this asset that there was this pinhole leak issue at the site.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very familiar with the pinhole problem because I had a 170 unit multifamily building that had the same problem as a senior building. At that time, the epoxy solution you all are suggesting now was not available. And it became very expensive to have to go in to the walls of these units on the stacks trying to deal with that issue. Certainly the cost of that would have been much higher than what you are proposing to do here. So, I mean, I certainly compliment you on finding this and trying to deal with it. And I hope that if we acquire any more properties for preservation, that this will be a part of our standard approach of looking at same things you looked at this time as indicators that there's a problem. Because it's just so important, especially when you own a building and with copper piping, they're going to pop up. If you don't do them now, you're going to have a major problem. If one of them really grows into becoming a major plumbing problem, takes out your hope. That's a different ball game. So I compliment you having discovered it now. I would like to have discovered it before, but only because taking some liability here. Okay.
Due diligence is always important. We remain committed to effective due diligence, always.
Yeah.
So, Commissioner.
No, I'm also glad that it's been found. I'm glad that this is not an emergency situation. I'm just curious about the process. I mean, I assume, do you have to shut off the water for some period of time, or, what is the impact on the residents?
I'd love to have Sean Asbury, our VP of Maintenance, step up and address that.
Good morning, Commissioners,
Good morning.
President Andrews, HOC staff, and members of the public. For the record, my name is Sean Asper. I'm the Vice President of Maintenance. So basically, the way the process works is that they bring in their equipment. The equipment is connected to 2 valves in each unit, and they use a vacuum system that clears out all the water that's in the piping. Then they use a sandblaster that goes in and basically etches the pipes to help with the adherence of the epoxy. The epoxy is then applied to all the pipes, and then the valves are replaced. The disruption is very minimal. There is no going into walls or ceilings, anything like that, which would have to happen if you were actually replacing the pipes. And typically they set a certain amount of units that they do per day. And at the end of the day, by the end of the day, 5 o'clock is what usually cut off. All those units are done. So it's very, the disruption period is very minimal.
During that period, they wouldn't have water?
Correct. That's correct. Yes.
And it doesn't need a period of time after that to
cure?
dry?
No, not at all. It automatically cures as it's injected into the pipes.
Okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
That's right.
Do they do an overall system testing after they have finished all of this?
They do, and they test all the valves as well. Typically, the only issues you may have once in a while is that some of the curing material may get into one of the valves or that sort of thing, and that's why they test them, open and close them before they leave to make sure that they have proper water flow.
All right. No, thank you.
Yep, my pleasure.
Yeah. I think my only other question is on the contingency. 20% seems like more than we usually do.
Right. I think, of course, we're just being judicious here because of the current circumstances with regards to tariffs and cost of goods. And so that's why the recommendation is a 20% contingency.
Hopefully we don't have to use it. And I imagine this will be one of those unanticipated items that show up in our variance of the capital costs. So,
yeah.
I will make a motion to support the staff's recommendation and send this to the full commission.
And I will second the motion. I have a question though. Under this contract with doing this work, is this a guaranteed maximum price contract, or is it what's the structure of the contract itself?
The contract is just for the price of the work. And so my understanding is that it's fixed in that sense. If they had a change order, then we would eat into the contingency.
Okay. I only ask that question because typically in construction, we look at a guaranteed maximum price contract.
Right.
The contractor. There's a much different scale than we're talking about here. But here, because of the nature of the work they've got to do, and they're using them, what they're using as a solution for it, we don't want to get stuck with amendment after amendment coming back with contract amendments for this talk.
We don't, but in this instance, they would have to encounter something that is unexpected, and then they would let us know if that had some type of repercussion that impacted the cost. And so that's why we built in that higher contingency, whereas in a construction contract, I would assume that there would be far more larger scale magnitude impacts, and that's when you would have a GMP. So for me, it's a large amount of money, but it's almost simple as doing a carpet replacement. It's just a lot of money and a lot of time. So it's not structured as a GMP per se.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. So ordered.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is for a roof replacement at Timberlawn Crescent Apartments.
Yes, commissioners, this is a item that was actually planned and similar to other capital repairs come through the board for approval. And I will turn it over to our Vice President of Asset Management, Kelly Dickerson, to provide this presentation.
Thank you, President Andrews. Indeed, this is relatively simple compared to the last. It is budgeted and expected. Timberlawn Crescent, as I had the pleasure of visiting the other day, is a first mixed income development and has serves a variety of county residents. But quite truthfully, it's beautifully landscaped with trees everywhere. So it's about time for it to have a new roof, I think. This is pretty simple, and so in the interest of time, I can skip ahead to the executive summary unless you have any questions. So will the committee support our recommendation to authorize the president and executive director to negotiate a contract and execute it with Atlantia Builders, the successful bidder in the procurement process, for the full scope replacement of the roofs at a cost of $290,000, and authorize funding from the reserve account for $319,000, which includes the HOC contingency of $29,000.
I would make a motion that we support the staff's recommendation.
Have we already selected a contractor for this work?
Sir?
Has the contractor been selected to do this work?
Yes, sir.
Oh.
Atlantia, I'm probably pronouncing that without the hardest T. They were part of the procurement process that was run.
Okay. All right, I second the motion. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. So ordered. Thank you.
Thank you.
Imagine all those trees are nice for the scenery, but not.
Not great for roots.
Okay, the last and final item I think on our agenda for today is dealing with the extension of procurement related to our property management contracts for a number of our properties.
Yeah.
So I will turn to you, President Andrews.
Thank you. Commissioners, as you may recall, last year we underwent a pretty robust process of executing new contracts with property managers across our portfolio. We are at the stage where at different tranches, we will be coming before the commission to request either to go back out and bring on a new contractor or property management service provider and or to renew contracts. There are multiple properties that are being advanced at this particular time, all of which our request is to move forward with renewals. I will just indicate that our contracts always provide us with the opportunity to cancel a contract at any point if the services do not meet our satisfaction, but to ensure continuity at these sites and based on the feedback that we've received, it is our current posture that we would be recommending renewal. I am going to allow our Vice President of Property Management, Ross Lloyd, to walk the commission through one of the first recommendations in terms of property managers. But I will say that within your packet, as well as in the public packet, there is this level of detail for every single property. And to the extent that there are any questions, we can direct the IT team to that particular property. But I'll turn it over to Ross Lloyd, Vice President of Property Management.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and Development Committee. My name is Ross Lloyd. I've been with HOC for approximately a little over 2 weeks. Looking forward to working with everyone. And today we just want to kind of briefly point out some of the highlights. We put these packages together for individual properties for the renewal. In the package that you see in front of you kind of just highlights just the background from the particular management companies. Like the first one we're looking at for the Langsley, Rizzuto is the actual vendor that will be managing the property for the contract. The actual contract cost was $166,000 and the contract end date was 12/31/2025. What we're looking at is to renew for the next coming year. On the next slide, just kind of giving you an overview, we actually, just this gives you a property summary of where the property is, where it's located, how many units. And down further, what we were able to do was do a tenant survey just to kind of get a feel for what our third-party management companies and their performance. As you see here, Brazzuto scored really, really high with their maintenance. And out of 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest, they had a 70% overall favorable rating. And our front desk came at 25% for 5 and 75% coming in at 4. So right now, when we're looking at our management companies, Brazzuto is coming in at #1 for overall customer satisfaction from our surveys. And this just gives you some brief highlights of that. Any questions?
This, because I know typically information on occupancy is usually included in his recommendations. For example, that the property is operating at 95% or whatever it may be. Typically, that's in the write-up of these. I don't know whether it's in this one or not.
It's not included in this one, but we can provide that for you.
We can update the information to include in the packet that goes before the commission for the October 8th date. But each of these properties, they have either met our occupancy requirements and or have demonstrated that they have a plan in place and have been working closely with us if they have not met the occupancy projected for that particular property.
Okay. Well, that would be helpful. I think it's just a matter of standard information that shows you that the work of the management company is in fact achieving a certain level of occupancy on a continuing basis. I'd be comfortable with that.
Yeah, no, and I understand we've built in, to the, that's part of their compensation, right?
Right. Their compensation is based on occupied units.
Yeah.
And we do provide, of course, on a quarterly basis, the occupancy of each of the sites. So it will not be problematic for us to add that here. And we can do so for the upcoming meeting.
Yeah.
So, no, I don't have any additional questions. I would, well, first, I want to welcome Russ to HOC. And I'm also, I think it would be a little crazy for your first presentation to have to present 27 times.
I appreciate it.
So that would be an unusual initiation. So I will make a motion to support the staff's recommendation for the renewal of these property management services for each of the properties presented.
And I would second that with the caveat that when this is presented to the full commission, so that we don't have to go through 27 of these, if you could just have an overall chart that shows you which companies and what property. Okay, so that if Brazzuto is not the one, they're not the management agent for every one of the properties you're recommending, I know. So there's a series of different property management companies that are part of this extension. So if you can just put a summary piece on top of it, that'd be helpful.
Yeah.
Okay.
Will do.
The other thing I do want to acknowledge the fact of the presence of information about the tenant survey. I mean, that always has typically come up from a commissioner. Well, what do the tenants think about it? So I'm glad you added that in here. And that's informative about what the people who live there think about it. It's not just an automatic renewal because we like the company or something, you know. The tenants also appreciate the service.
Correct.
So that would be very helpful. So thank you very much for that. With that, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. So ordered. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
With that, no further business to come before the Budget, Finance, and Audit Committee. I adjourn this meeting as of 12:05 p.m.
Thank you.
We started in the morning. We finish in the afternoon.